Hi and welcome to another video. So recently we have hit 5,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel, for which I'm really grateful for. And lately we have asked you to submit some questions, and in this video we'll be answering them. So grab yourself a cup of coffee and let's get started. All right, so the first question is, should I be worried about my investments in Russia or Ukraine? Well, personally, I'm not worried. We have actually reached out to several companies operating in those markets, and they have confirmed that currently they don't see an imminent threat to their lending portfolios. However, you never know what's going to happen in the future. We will do a dedicated video on this topic in the next 2 weeks, so stay tuned for more information about that one. How do you think does the inflation impact P2P lenders? Inflation does have an impact on P2P lenders, and if the inflation is too big, they might get into financial trouble. There is, however, a lot of different aspects that have also an impact on P2P lenders, so it's not just inflation. We actually reached out to some of the lending companies and they confirmed that due to the high interest rates that they are charging to borrowers, they are able to cover those expenses that come with inflation. So one tip to give you is to avoid investing in over-leveraged lenders, as they will have a way harder time to cover those expenses if something goes bad. All right, so how is the situation going with different licenses P2P has applied for? From our knowledge, they are in the final stage to getting approved by the Lithuanian Central Bank. They have already fulfilled all the requirements. They're just waiting to get approved. So P2P is expecting to get the license really soon. When that happens, be sure that you will be notified on this channel as well. So is investing in P2P lending safer than, for example, buying ETFs? P2P lending and ETFs are both very different asset classes. It can be compared from a risk and safety aspect, but different ETFs will have different risks associated with that kind of investment, and certain groups of P2P loans will have different risks as well. So it always comes down in what kind of ETFs or what kind of P2P loans you are investing. Do you invest in other assets like stocks, bonds, crypto, real estate, private equity? Yes, I do invest in other assets. I would recommend to also diversify your portfolio if possible. I will, however, not dive into the asset allocation of my personal portfolio, as it's quite irrelevant for you. It's also changing on a monthly basis based on different market conditions. And when it comes to investments, you should always decide for yourself, dependent on your risk tolerance, in which assets to invest and in which not. Do you prefer a safe 12% loan with a long maturity or a safe 10% short-term loan to get the highest liquidity if you need to withdraw your capital? I would generally tend more towards long-term loan with higher interest rate if the loan principal and the interest are being repaid on a monthly basis. If it's not the case, it's probably better to go for the second option, but it really comes down to the asset itself, to the loan originator, and whether those loans are perhaps secured as well. What do you think about the future of Mintos? Today they have a bad rate, which decreased to 7%, and a lot of defaulted loans. It's also not secure for investors. Well, Mintos is a P2P marketplace, and the interest that you are getting is what the loan originators are ready to pay to finance their loan book. If the loan originators manage to acquire cheap funding capital, they don't need so much from P2P marketplaces like Mintos, hence the lower interest rate. So if you are looking for a high interest rate, I would suggest to look elsewhere or expose yourself to some of the emerging markets where the interest rate is still high. All right, Danny asked a question. Risk spreading is important. Some of the platforms have started lately. Which indicators are most important when there is no track record? So risk spreading is important. However, if you spread risks across newly launched platform, you're definitely not decreasing the risk, right? Because there is no track record, so you cannot really evaluate the risk associated with your investments. When it comes to new platforms, you should always look at the people who launched the platform, whether they have sufficient experience in order to operate P2P lending or a crowdfunding platform. It's actually not that simple, and generally speaking, if there are people who have no previous experience in the banking sector or in the lending business, it's typically not a good sign, and I would probably wait until there is some kind of track record. Another aspect to look at is also the legitimacy. So look at it from a legal standpoint. Certain countries offer crowdfunding licenses. So if the platform is a crowdfunding platform, you should look where they are based and whether they are licensed by the local regulators. What's your global strategy with P2P investments? It's a good question. Typically, my strategy is to be exposed more towards the Eastern European markets and some markets in Asia, like for instance Kazakhstan or Singapore with the Robocash group. I'm not as keen on going to Africa or South America at the moment, at least, and I also avoid some of the Southeast Asian markets. Which platforms are you using and why? So I suggest you look at the latest monthly portfolio performance here on this YouTube channel, where I'm talking about the platforms that I'm currently exposed to, and as of when or why I think that they offer the best risk and return ratio according to my risk tolerance. So what are the main criteria to choose your platform? I think there are two main criteria. The first is the current performance of the loan book, and the second is the people who are running those businesses. As with any business, there are people making decisions, which is also the reason why we do so many P2P talks, just to get an idea who is behind the platform and whether the answers to our questions are legitimate in a sense. So I think the performance and the people behind it are the two main criteria which help you to determine the risk and return ratio in a sense. But of course, there are hundreds of criteria that you could consider, which is also something that we look at when doing our reviews. We try to look at every platform from different angles, try to estimate the risk associated with that kind of investment. Do you think there is more or less risk in crypto stablecoin lending with DeFi or CeFi? It's just a different risk. It's not more or less. Every DeFi has different risks and CeFi has different risks that you should be aware of. When it comes to crypto stablecoin lending, if you have watched our latest video about Tether, where we talked about the regulatory proposal for stablecoins, you are aware that for fiat-backed stablecoins, there's probably not going to be any more yield in the future. So that's something to consider as well. What are the biggest mistakes you have made in P2P investments? Ignoring red flags. Biggest mistake for sure. Are there some platforms to avoid? Yes, plenty of platforms to avoid. You can have a look at our website P2P Empire. Just go into the review section. You will see the lowest rated platforms or platforms that we think should be avoided. Are some loan originators or countries to avoid? Are some safe? Mintos is having problems right now to recover the capital of investors from Turkey. Yes, there's definitely loan originators to avoid or countries to avoid. It really comes down to your risk tolerance. So one cannot just say, oh, avoid this country or that country, because other investors might be more opportunistic and invest in those countries or those lenders in order to get a higher interest rate. So it's always a question of risk and return. Of course, if you want to decrease your risk here, I would suggest you stick to regulated markets and to established lenders with a good track record, audited financials, and relatively low leverage. What do you think about Swapper? They have high returns, but not so much information about the company. Yes, exactly as you pointed out, higher returns than most of the average platforms, but there's not so much info about the company. And yeah, we don't have such a close collaboration with Swapper, but if we ask any questions, they tend to get back to us. So yeah, they also performed quite well during the pandemic. They didn't lock any assets, which is something to consider as well. Are you looking or testing for new platforms? Right now, I'm not testing any new platforms. I'm actually looking for higher quality than quantity in my portfolio, which is something that I will be also following for the upcoming year. Why 99% of investors on the internet don't know or don't talk about P2P investing? Well, there's a lot of people on the internet that are looking for a way to get rich quick, and P2P investing is definitely not a way to get rich quick. It's right the opposite, actually. I think it takes a long time to start noticing the compounding interest, and it takes also a lot of discipline. You should ideally increase your portfolio on a monthly basis, as you know, if you just invest once and let it compound for 5 years, especially if it's a lower amount, it's not going to be so much yield on that. So after all the threats from Russia, do you still invest in Russia? Why yes or no? Yes, I still invest in Russia. I am basing my investment decision on the information that I have currently available. And when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, I actually talked to a lot of lending companies and I evaluated a lot of other sources as well. As of right now, I'm not worried about my investments in those countries. But of course, it comes down to the lending company that you're investing in as well. So it's not just the country. Your thoughts on Quanloop and IBAN Wallet? Stay away from it. Your academy pages have not been updated lately. Why? Yeah, so we have just released a new version for our website. So we're focused on that. There are some academy pages that haven't been updated lately. That's correct. We will fix that in the near future. However, when it comes to platform relevant news, those are still up to date. And if there is anything worrisome going on, make sure to follow our newsfeed to get notified about that. What parameters are the most important in your opinion when evaluating the financial statements of an originator? So on a yearly basis, I think that the profitability is the most important factor. However, the debt to equity ratio is something that you should definitely pay attention to. Also, not on a yearly basis, but on a quarterly basis if you have the access to those reports. The thing is that the debt to equity ratio gives you the information about the leverage of the company. And especially in unregulated markets or emerging markets, the higher the leverage, obviously the higher the risk that you are taking when investing into those loans. Also, highly regulated lenders will get more into trouble if there is an inflation or if there are some other country relevant risks than lenders that are more conservative from that side of the business. So definitely profitability and debt to equity ratio. Crypto staking and crypto lending are similar to P2P lending. I consider Celsius unsafe. Do you know any trustworthy platform for crypto staking? It's a very good question. Trustworthy platforms for crypto lending is not that easy to answer. We have talked to two platforms, YouHodler and Capital. The CEOs made quite a trustworthy impression on us. However, when it comes to the products, it's something that you should decide on your own. I would definitely suggest to watch our videos. I can link them in the description below if you want to get an idea about who is running the platform and get also a sense of their business model. If you think that's a good fit for you, you can also read our reviews and maybe test them out by yourself. Hello, hope all is well with you. There is a lending platform in Portugal called GoParity. Can you do some reviews about them? So we are getting actually requests to review platforms almost on a daily basis. And unfortunately, our resources are quite limited. So we cannot always review all the platforms that you are requesting us to do. In the nearest future, we'll be more focusing on updating the reviews that we have on our website and create exclusive content to make sure that those platforms are still safe in 2022, rather than adding a lot of new platforms. What do you think about the income marketplace? Well, they are raising a lot of money recently, so I hope for sure that they know what they are doing. We have actually had the CEO of the income marketplace, Kimmo Ritkonen, in our latest P2P talk. So if you want to get to know him better, I suggest you watch the interview. I think he made quite an honest impression on me especially. But of course, when it comes to investing, you should always look at the assets and decide for yourself whether the risk and return ratio is a good fit for you. So that's all I have to say about that. All right, so those have been all of the questions that you have submitted to us on Slido. I really appreciate all your engagement and support towards our project. I can let you know that in 2022, we will focus even more on the quality of the content that we produce in order to make your investments even safer. All right, so thanks for watching. I wish you a great 2022 and I'll catch you in the next video.